He comes to a point where at a riverside he wrestles with God all night long, and God decides to get his attention, and God physically takes and jabs him in the hip, takes out Jacob's hip bone. And it's at that moment that Jacob realizes that he needs to give the full blessing back to God. In Exodus chapter 34, Moses has been up on Mount Sinai. God had called him up to Mount Sinai. He had been up there for 4 chapters of Exodus, and God is pouring out all these commandments, pouring out all these things that he expects of the Israelites as they wander through the desert. And he's given it to Moses, he's given it to it. He's up there so long that the people down at the bottom of the mountain almost forget about Moses. And look at what it says. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. He had been in the presence of God, and God's glory had touched his physical being in such a way that it changed his physical appearance so that he radiated the glory of God. And in fact, every time Moses went in the tent of the meeting to meet with God and he came out, his face radiated from having been in the presence of God. God touched Moses. And then God takes it to a whole new level, to a whole new dimension. Throughout the Old Testament, he touches his people, but in the New Testament, through the birth of his Son, Jesus Christ. Jesus, who was fully God and fully man. Jesus' name, who was Emmanuel, which means God with us, came onto the earth. And in the last 3 years of Jesus' life, during his ministry, as he wandered from village to village, as he shared his ministry with people, as he shared his love and his grace, he did it through touch. And as we look at the Gospels, we see in countless places where Jesus touched people. One such example is in Mark chapter 7. Mark has a ton of examples of Jesus touching. And this one in Mark chapter 7 is cool. There's a group of people that have this man who is deaf and he's mute. And so they bring him to Jesus and they beg him to place his hands on him. Mark chapter 7, verse 3. After he took him aside, one of his fingers into the man's ears. I just taught my daughter this past Thursday on Thanksgiving Day how to give a wet willy. She won't quit. But think about that. Someone else's fingers in your ears. And then we continue on. Then he spit. Ooh, that doesn't bode well with our germ-free world. And touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said, Ephphatha, which means be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened. His tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Not only the sensation of someone's fingers in your ears, someone spitting and touching your tongue, but after he had done that, after Jesus had done that, the man was able to hear, the man was able to speak. After a life of not being able to hear and speak, can you imagine the joy and the new life that that person experienced in that moment? Through the physical touch of God, through His Son, Jesus Christ, on that man. Don't you wish Jesus was right here now to touch you? Don't you wish you could experience the physical touch of Jesus Christ right now? Look at another story from Mark chapter 5. It's a story of a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years. 12 years straight of having her period. And in this time when a woman was in that state, as she walked around amongst people, she always had to declare herself unclean, unclean. And as soon as she declared herself unclean, people stepped back. And there was no sense of touch that she experienced for 12 years. No one reached out and touched her. Now, Jesus is in town. He's actually on his way to bring a girl back to life from death. And as he's walking through the streets, there's all kinds of people crowding around him. Listen to the story of this woman. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt her body that was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are going, "There's all kinds of people crowding around you. What are you asking? Who touched me?" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet. Trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said, this is what Jesus said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from suffering." You see, the touch of Jesus on each one of us, even though he is not here physically, even though he is not able to touch you physically, he is still able to reach into every last one of your lives and touch you spiritually by faith. No matter what you are suffering from, no matter what your heartache, no matter what is going on in your life, right now, Jesus can come and touch you. So let me ask the question, what is it that you're suffering from? There are people in this room, there are people that are part of this church that suffer daily from physical ailments. For some, it's cancer. For others, it's heart disease. For others, it's any number of things that they suffer from daily, physically. There's people in this room that are trapped in habitual sin. A sin that no matter how much they come on Sunday morning, no matter how much they come on Wednesday night, no matter how much they come before God and say, "God, please forgive me," the sin keeps coming back, and the physical aspect of that is hard on them. They're hurting from the sin that's continually there. And there's others that the very word touch brings pain into their life. In the ministry I'm a part of, I'm acutely aware of how devastating some touch has been in some people's lives. We live in a sexually explosive society, and because of that, the boundaries which God has placed on those areas are broken every day. And so we turn on the news at night and we hear of religious leaders that have abused their power and have touched someone in an inappropriate way. We hear of spouses who have hurt spouses because of inappropriate touch.